So dig this. A man was bulldozing a bog in central Ireland the other day when he noticed something unusual in the freshly turned soil. Turns out he'd unearthed an early medieval treasure, an ancient book of Psalms that experts date to the years 800 to 1000. Experts say it will take years of painstaking work to document and preserve this book, but eventually it will go on public display. Now here's the kicker. The book, about 20 pages of Latin script, was allegedly found open to Psalm 83. Now, if you're a scholar, as you know, Psalm 83, God hears complaints that other nations are plotting to wipe out the name of Israel.
The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within it. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
Who do you think can bring them to the table at this point?
Well, I think the Egyptians play the primary role because of their geographic contiguity. Egypt is a very important Arab country with a strong military capability, and it has traditionally brokered agreements between Hamas and Israel. So I think Egypt plays a very major role. That's where I think the negotiations, any ceasefire negotiations, will probably be centered.
The violence must stop. It must stop now. All sides must provide the necessary space to aid the victims, assist the wounded, and extend the relief to trapped civilians. And I'm again urging the two parties to unconditionally stop and return to dialogue.
Good morning, everybody. I want to make a brief statement about the tragedy in Ukraine. Before I do, though, I want to note that Secretary Kerry has departed for the Middle East. As I've said many times, Israel has a right to defend itself against rocket and tunnel attacks from Hamas. And as a result of its operations, Israel has already done significant damage to Hamas's terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. I've also said, however, that we have serious concerns about the rising number of Palestinian civilian deaths and the loss of Israeli lives. And that is why it now has to be our focus and the focus of the international community to bring about a ceasefire that ends the fighting and that can stop the deaths of innocent civilians, both in Gaza and in Israel. So Secretary Kerry will meet with allies and partners. I've instructed him to push for an immediate cessation of hostilities based on a return to the November 2012 ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The work will not be easy. Obviously, there are enormous passions involved in this and some very difficult strategic issues involved. Nevertheless, I've asked John to do everything he can to help facilitate a cessation to hostilities. We don't want to see any more civilians getting killed.
So Jim, tell us, how is the international community responding to the crisis right now?
The president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is due to meet with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in Qatar. And here in Washington, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, was caught in an unguarded moment when he thought the cameras weren't rolling, apparently criticizing the severity of the Israeli attacks. Listen.
It's a hell of a pinpoint operation. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation.
Right. It's escalating significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire.
We've got to get over there.
Yep.
Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
The Secretary speaking on the phone to an aide there. That's certainly raising eyebrows here in Washington, where Israel is considered a major ally. The Secretary will, however, travel to Cairo Monday to try to work on a ceasefire brokered through the Egyptians, Susan.
You're doing a series of interviews with all of the networks, and while you were on camera and while you were on microphone, you just spoke to one of your top aides in between the interviews about the situation in Israel and the fact that 14 Israelis have either been shot or killed in an operation. We want to play a clip of that conversation because it's an extraordinary moment of diplomacy. Take a look at this.
Yeah. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation.
Right. It's escalating significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire.
We've got to get over there.
Yep.
Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
Secretary Kerry, when you said it's a hell of a pinpoint operation, are you upset that the Israelis are going too far? And in fact, do you intend to go back to the Middle East tonight, sir?
I think it's very, very difficult in these situations. Obviously very difficult, Chris. You have people who've come out of tunnels. You have a right to go in and take out those tunnels. We completely support that. And we support Israel's right to defend itself against rockets that are, continuing to come in. Hamas has started this process of rocketing after Israel was trying to find the people who killed 3 young and 1 American kid, 3 young Israeli citizens. It's disgraceful. And so, yeah, it's tough. It's tough to have this kind of operation. And I reacted, obviously, in a way that, anybody does with respect to, young children and civilians. But war is tough, and I said that publicly, and I'll say it again. We defend Israel's right to do what it is doing in order to get at those tunnels. Israel has accepted a unilateral ceasefire. It's accepted the Egyptian plan, which we also support, and it is important for Hamas to now step up and be reasonable and understand that you accept a ceasefire, you save lives, and that's the way we can proceed to have a discussion about all of the underlying issues which President Obama has clearly indicated a willingness to do.
Secretary Kerry, we appreciate your answering all of our questions, even if occasionally I do interrupt. And thank you very much, sir, and safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim.
Keep not thou silence, O daughter. Hold not thy peace, and be not still. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden one. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Ebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also is joined with them. They hope in the children of Lot.
We affirm that there will be no appeasement with the Israeli occupant who started the war and the aggression. They will pay the price of this war and this aggression with fear, killing, and the destruction brought by rockets of Al-Qassam brigades.
I wish I were a young man, he said. I could wear a suicide belt and go and blow myself up in Tel Aviv.
The Israeli offensive does not fear the leaders in Hamas or the Palestinian people, and we in Hamas guarantee that the occupation army will sink in the mud of Gaza.
אנחנו הגענו לאיתור הראשון, מקפים אותו חיל אוויר. כבר
Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity, to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. And I will cut off the inhabitant from Ashdod, and him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon, and I will turn mine hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord God.
Since it is impossible to deal with the tunnels only by aerial means, our troops are also dealing with it on the ground. Here as well, there are no guarantees for total success, but we will do our utmost to achieve the best result. My instructions to the I.D.F. are to prepare for the possibility of significantly widening the ground operation, and the Chief of Staff and the military are prepared accordingly.
Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, the land of the Philistines, I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall be thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. For the Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity.
One Israeli soldier confirmed dead, the crisis in the Middle East boiling over. Israeli tanks crossing the border into Gaza, escalating the conflict with Hamas. Israeli officials say they ordered the ground assault in order to destroy tunnels dug from Gaza into Israeli territory. Authorities say earlier Thursday, 13 Hamas militants used a tunnel in an attempt to enter and attack a town in southern Israel. They were stopped by the Israeli military. The ground invasion follows 10 days of Israeli bombings in Gaza, killing more than 260 people, most of them civilians. Israel says its aim was to stop Hamas from firing rockets into the country. All of this comes on the heels of one of the worst evenings of violence in the region, after a temporary humanitarian ceasefire ended. Hamas immediately condemned Israel's incursion, quote, Israel will pay a heavy price for it, and adding in a later television appearance that the group's military forces are far stronger than during previous conflicts with Israel, saying, quote, the resistance will confront the Israeli ground invasion and will defend the people of Gaza.
Congressman King, I want to start with you. Are you confident that the U.S. is doing enough behind the scenes and publicly to support Israel at this point? We understand Secretary Kerry is going to travel to the region, try to broker some peace. Do you think we're doing enough?
I think we are. I was a little concerned at the beginning when the administration was talking about restraints on both sides, but I think Secretary Kerry has made it clear that Israel has the absolute right to defend itself. This is life and death. They're not allowed even one mistake or one error. I mean, one bad day and Israel could be destroyed as a nation. And I think it's really so hypocritical of other countries and other world leaders and some people in the media for having this sense of moral equivalency between Israel and Hamas. To me, Hamas is what Al-Qaeda was to us on 9/11. They're an evil terrorist group and gang, and Israel has the absolute right to do all it can to defend itself. and take whatever action it has to against Hamas. And any civilian deaths are because of Hamas and the way they have positioned their rockets and their forces.
The militant group Hamas has claimed to have captured an Israeli soldier. Sunday's announcement coincided with what's described as one of the fiercest days of Israeli shelling in the last 2 weeks. And CCTV's Jim Spellman is live in our newsroom with more on this. Jim.
You can see people there in that Hamas television clip cheering when it was announced that they had taken this Israeli prisoner hostage, prisoner of war. Essentially, you'll have to see what that does to the tensions there in Gaza. It certainly could ramp them up.
Meantime, in one of the bloodiest days in the nearly 2-week-old conflict, at least 13 Israeli soldiers have been killed. The death toll brings the total number of Israeli military fatalities to 18, while the Palestinian death toll climbed to more than 400. As fighting spreads, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the two sides show no signs of a diplomatic breakthrough.
We didn't seek this escalation. Hamas forced it on us. They started rocketing our cities, steadily increasing the fire. I called for de-escalation. They refused. I accepted an Egyptian ceasefire proposal backed up by the Arab League and the UN. They refused. I accepted a humanitarian law proposed by the United Nations. They refused. We'll stop our operations when we can bring back quiet to our people.
The Israeli military says it has beefed up its presence with armored vehicles and helicopters along the border. They say their mission is to destroy Hamas missile stockpiles and a vast tunnel system. Israel has also accused Hamas of using civilians as human shields.
The international community has to, once this is put in place, we really have to undertake a program to demilitarize Gaza and to change the situation because it's unacceptable. What makes it unacceptable is Hamas and Islamic Jihad. These people are the worst terrorists, genocidal terrorists. They call for the destruction of Israel, and they call for the killing of every Jew wherever they can find.
Secretary of State John Kerry going to Cairo to push for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. This as you look at the latest images out of Gaza. Meanwhile, prior to an interview on Fox News Sunday, Secretary Kerry was on an open microphone apparently mocking Israel's claims about the accuracy of its military operation. Later on the air, Mr. Kerry expressed U.S. support for Israel's right to defend himself. First, the moment
it's a hell of a pinpoint operation. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation.
Right. It's escalating significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire.
We've got to get over there.
Yep.
Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
And apparently he followed through on that decision. He went to Cairo. Katie McFarland, our Fox News national security analyst here in New York. And good morning to you, Katie. What did you make of that? What does it tell you?
What it tells you is Secretary Kerry's mindset going into any kind of a ceasefire. He's already decided that Israel's wrong. Israel's in the wrong. Now, he says all the talking points, Israel has the right to exist, to defend itself. But the off-mic moment tells you a lot. It means that he's going into any kind of a ceasefire with the attitude that Israel's gone too far, that Israel has too many civilian casualties. And so you sort of know where his bias is walking in. And the reason this is important is because the fear has always been, in the last several years in the Obama administration, that they weren't as committed to Israel, that they weren't really sort of, as previous American presidents and previous political leaders in the United States have been sort of, deciding that Israel's got to have whatever it takes to survive and to exist in that region. So you worry that he walks into this negotiation already with a little prejudice against Israel.
Let me stop you there, because I was watching it. I thought it was a very interesting moment. I don't think very often you find moments like that, especially on stories that are as significant as this. And he went on when Chris Wallace asked him to follow up and find out, what his intention was there, because I think Wallace called it to paraphrase him, an interesting diplomatic moment. Secretary Kerry said, listen, you should be able to defend yourself from rockets that come into your country. Mm-hmm. And you should be able to go after tunnels if they're sending terrorists into your territory.
Right. Hamas knows it's not going to win this fight. I mean, it's a round of violence that Hamas always starts. They have an incident, Israel responds, Hamas responds by lobbing rockets into Israel. Israel goes in and takes out the rockets. And then what does Hamas do in the interim period? Builds up more rockets to fight again. Hamas knows it doesn't win militarily. It hopes its only chance is to win diplomatically, politically, so that if there are casualties, and they want Palestinian casualties, then they can go to the world and say, see, Israel's the aggressor.
So what you're suggesting, Hamas would score a huge victory if it could divide Israel and the United States.
That's the key.
But do you see that happening under this administration?
That's the key, and that's the worry. Israel knows that, say, for example, in Iran with nuclear weapons, that's an existential threat to Israel's existence. But suicide is Israel and the United States breaking, because then Israel really is all alone in the world. Israel needs the American alliance. America should stand up for Israel. Hamas understands that. They understand if they can drive a wedge between the two, they win.
Just not to get too particular on this, but we're encouraging Hamas to take this ceasefire deal on behalf of Egypt. But Egypt has outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas supports the Muslim Brotherhood. So who brokers this?
Well, that's the biggest question of all. In the past, Egypt has been able to broker. The United States has been able to broker. Israel doesn't want the Muslim Brotherhood. They see it as a threat to their own existence. And so that's why Hamas is saying maybe we're going to have a different deal. Maybe Qatar could broker this deal. Maybe Turkey could broker this deal. On the other hand, those are Qatar is who's supporting Hamas. You know, it's the Middle East, Bill. Nothing ever makes sense, and everything's always complicated.
And it comes around over and over again, which comes back to your point that Hamas sees itself in a normal state, you believe, as a group that's constantly at war with Israel.
We understand in the West, we think peace is what's the normal state of events. Israel thinks the same way. War is something when peace breaks down, and you got to fight, but then you fight and it's done and you have peace again. Hamas and in the Middle East and the whole mindset of the whole jihadist mindset, terrorist mindset, war is constant. Peace is merely a pause while you regroup to fight again. And their goal of victory is that all Christians and Jews are dead and Israel no longer exists as a Jewish state. I mean, one of their leading clerics, who's got the most popular talk show host in the Middle East, he says, the reason we will ultimately win is young Muslim men love death more than young Jews and Christians love life.
Well, the last incursion in Gaza lasted about 15 days. I think we're on day 5 now, so we'll see whether or not it continues. Katie, thank you. Katie McFarland in studio.
Ban Ki-moon and Secretary John Kerry are in Cairo. How effective do you think they can be in sort of brokering something that involves Egypt? Do you think they're in a position to get anything done?
No. I do think the Cairo initiative was great. It was actually great to see the Egyptian government step up and do this. There is a bit of a tussle between the Qataris and the Egyptians over who's really calling the shots here, and that's unfortunate. But I think it's going to be a regional-led solution and pressure for solution. And I'm sure that the Secretary General and the Secretary of State are very well-meaning, but you know what? They're not the big players in this one.
What, in your mind, would look like a successful solution here?
Well, it's kind of the wrong question. Obviously, the Egyptian proposal is completely reasonable and a perfectly fine suggestion, but let's look at this realistically. From Hamas's perspective, if you're just being reasonable about doing something that makes sense, they would have never gone to war to begin with. Hamas is in a very weakened position. They're out of money. They're out of friends. The Arab street is not rising up for them. There isn't a lot of international pressure on Israel. They've been dealt a really bad losing hand here, and yet they're continuing to fight. So it's not necessarily about being what we would say, what's a reasonable deal? A reasonable deal is on the table. That's not what's important for Hamas right now.
So Israel's government officials were coming out and saying that basically they realize it's been a slow mission addressing some of the civilian casualties, but they feel like they're moving forward in their military operations. So once they feel comfortable and feel like they've accomplished what this mission was meant to be, do they just wrap up, wipe their hands and
I think when the
away?
Israelis are done with their military objectives, they will absolutely pull out as quickly as possible and go home. Again, the Israelis came out and said they'd accept the Egyptian proposal because, in a sense, they've already won. And every day that Hamas continues to fight is another day the Israelis are going to take away more military capability from Hamas. They're going to find more tunnels. They're going to cut more off. They're going to degrade Hamas even more. A recent poll came out, said a majority of Palestinians are actually not in favor of Hamas anymore. So every day Hamas fights, it loses a little more ground. And I think that just plays to Israel's advantage.
All right, James Carafano, we appreciate your time. We wish we had more time. Thank you so much for your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
This is the beginning of the third week of the Israeli offensive. Margaret Brennan is in Cairo, where Secretary of State John Kerry is trying to convince Hamas to accept a ceasefire. Margaret, good morning.
Good morning. Secretary Kerry is here to build on an Egyptian proposal to forge a ceasefire between the Israelis and Hamas. But American diplomats say this is going to be very difficult, in part because the fighting is so much more severe than during the last flare-up in 2012. This time, it's not clear whether any Arab state can get Hamas to stop firing. And Egypt's new president has very limited sway over its fighters. He does, however, control the border with Gaza, and opening it up is a key demand being made by Hamas. Kerry is speaking to al-Sisi about that right now. The Obama administration is very concerned about the high number of civilian casualties and overnight pledged $47 million to aid the 80,000 Palestinians in Gaza that the UN says are now seeking shelter. But Charlie and Nora, as hard-won as any possible ceasefire would be, American diplomats aren't going to stop there. Kerry says he believes a broader peace deal is necessary to end this 14-year conflict with Hamas. As the UN said, Gaza's an open wound, and Band-Aids won't help.
Obviously, the goal of the Israelis is the same as it was in 2008, 2012, which is basically to really diminish Hamas's military infrastructure and especially its rocket capabilities. That's why they decided to go in on the ground to get to these tunnels, which the focus of the military action is, because the Israeli Air Force did extensive damage, but obviously not enough to diminish the capability of Hamas and other groups like PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to launch rockets from Gaza into Israel. So I think the military focus will be on this military infrastructure, and it just depends on how much they can destroy and what assessment they make, that if they destroyed enough, that there may be a future period of calm for a year or two.
I spoke today with two people heavily invested in the outcome of the events playing out in Gaza now. One, a leader of a nation, and another who is in constant contact with Hamas inside Gaza. I began by asking Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if there was any hope for a ceasefire.
Well, of course there's a hope for that, but, you know, in the Middle East it takes two to tango, sometimes three, maybe four. I think there's an Egyptian initiative for ceasefire. We accepted it. Hamas rejected it. As we accepted the ceasefire proposed by the UN for humanitarian purposes, they rejected it. We accepted a Red Cross ceasefire for humanitarian purposes. Hamas rejected that too. So the hope is there. I don't know if it'll happen, but the point is that there's one side that is clearly bent on escalation and one side that is Israel, that is bent on defending its people as any country would under similar circumstances.
The administration has said that you obviously have the right to defend yourself. They have noted and been concerned about the rising casualties. Let me get your reaction to Secretary Kerry over the weekend in this conversation about your operation. Take a listen.
It's a hell of a pinpoint operation. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation.
Right. It's escalating really significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire.
We've got to get over there.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
What do you think about that, Prime Minister?
No, I don't want to deal with off-the-cuff remarks. I'll tell you what my experiences have been. I've been in war. I've been in battle. And when you take a surgical operation, you can't guarantee when your soldiers are being fired from Hamas homes, that is, Hamas is targeting people from private homes, and you hit them back, of course some people are going to be hurt. That's totally different from deliberately targeting them. And you know what? The forces that went into Sajaya, this place, where there are tunnels in homes, we have to clear out the homes. Hamas puts civilians, Palestinian civilians there. We go out to ferret out rocketeers and anti-tank rocket fire. Hamas put civilians there. We asked these civilians before we went in, we said, please leave. We text them, we called them on cell phones, we dropped leaflets, we told them where to go. And those who left were safe. Now those who didn't leave, you know why they didn't leave? Because Hamas told them to be there. Because Hamas, while we try to avoid Palestinian civilian dead, Hamas wants Palestinian civilian dead. The more the better. So he can give you telegenic fodder. So this is the cruelest, most grotesque war that I've ever seen. I mean, not only does Hamas target civilians, ours, and hides behind their civilians, theirs, it actually wants to pile up as many civilian deaths as possible.
Do you worry, Mr. Prime Minister, that Americans watching the Israeli-Palestinian conflict unfold in U.S. media outlets get a distorted picture of the reality?
Yeah, of course, because they only see the last reel of the movie. They don't see the part that comes before, where Hamas is embedding itself in civilians, hiding behind them, firing on us, hoping that they'll either be immune or that when we do attack the Rocketeers and their fighters, that civilian deaths are caused because they want them to be caused. I think, in general, the American public, and I say this to its credit, understands this. These are people who don't care about life. The only thing is they are using cynically their own people as propaganda fodder. And I think Americans largely get it. They know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. I don't think it's particularly true of the United States, but there are some in the West who tell us we support Israel's right to exist, right to defend itself, as long as you don't exercise that right. Well, what else could we do? What would you do if 80% of your people were in bomb shelters? Imagine 50 million Americans in bomb shelters. They have to get into a bomb shelter within 60 to 90 seconds. You try to pinpoint the Rocketeers, and you have some civilian deaths. Would Americans understand this? Of course they understand.
So when you hear people, Mr. Prime Minister...
They understand who the good guys are and who the bad guys. Israel is the good guy and Hamas is the bad guy.
When you hear people call for restraint, when you hear people saying the civilian casualties are unacceptable, when you hear people saying this is enough, what do you say?
I say forward that to the one address that's responsible for all this, and that's Hamas. Who wants civilian casualties? Who wants to accelerate and escalate? We're forced to do it. What would you do? What would anybody do? You just have to put yourself in Israel's place, and if you're a leader, put yourself in my place, and ask a simple question. What would you do? If you look at the historical antecedents, I think the answer is very clear. Israel is acting with great restraint because there's no other country that's been rocketed like this, with thousands of rockets. We've just had close to 2,000 rockets and mortars in the last few days on just about every one of our cities. Well, the only historical parallel is Britain rocketed by the Nazis in World War II. If we start drawing parallels, what Britain did compared to what we do, we've been showing a hell of a lot of restraint. So if there's any complaints, and there should be, about civilian deaths, they belong, the responsibility and the blame belongs in one place, Hamas. I don't think anyone should get that wrong.
Last thing very quickly, sir. At the same time, there is this 6-week extension of the negotiations with Iran, with the P5+1. Do you worry about that? What is your reaction to that without sanctions on Iran?
Look, I think no deal is better than a bad deal, so if they didn't make a deal, that's good. But if the extension gives them more money and actually eases the sanctions regime, that's bad. Iran wants a different deal. It wants to say, I keep everything, I just put it under lock and key, and I'll put an inspector there. But that inspector could be kicked out at any time. They break the padlock and they have the nuclear bomb within weeks, the material for a nuclear bomb within weeks. That's a bad deal. I think that should not be allowed. And if it's necessary to ratchet up the pressure, that's what should be done. Certainly don't soften it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Saviour. I gave Egypt for thy ransom, Ethiopia and Seba for thee. Since thou wast precious in my sight, thou hast been honored, and I have loved thee. Therefore will I give men for thee, and people for thy life. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east, and gather thee from the west. I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far, and my daughters from the ends of the earth, even every one that is called by my name. for I have created him for my glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. Bring forth the blind people that have eyes, and the deaf that have ears. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. Who among them can declare this, and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified. Or let them hear, and say, it is truth. Ye are my witnesses, said the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. I, even I, am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior.